Welcome to Curious Goldfish, a podcast community where music and curiosity come together through interesting conversations with the music makers of our world. I'm your host, Jason English. You can find Curious Goldfish in all the major podcast and social media platforms. And of course, we have all of our content on our website, curiousgoldfish.com. It's so nice to meet you, and I appreciate your time. How are you?
I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, no, it's cool. You've got a lot going on with the new album, and it's almost the holidays. Tell me something good about your week so far.
Something good. Well, I had my son for a couple days because I have joint custody with my son. So I had my son, and he said to me, "Mommy, do you know what bioluminescence is?" And he's 6 years old. And I said, "Tell me what bioluminescence is." And he said, "It's when there's plankton underneath the sea in the deepest part of the sea, but it still sheds light." And I thought that was a really nice metaphor for the election that just happened.
Okay, that's good. Well, nice job. Nice job, Huck, right? That's
Yeah,
his
my
name, right?
6-year-old has more forgiveness than I do.
All right. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, leave it to the kids to put a good context to bad situations. So,
I think so. Yeah.
yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. So, the new album is called The American Dream, and you've released a fair number through the years. Why The American Dream now?
Well, I've been writing through COVID, so I was collecting all these songs. I was really prolific during COVID, and I was writing a lot of songs that were sort of nostalgic, like looking back on past dreams that either happened or didn't quite happen the way that I or somebody would want them to. And I realized I had this thematic going. And I was joking to a friend and said, "I live in Nashville and I don't write country music. Maybe I should try to write a country song." It was just an exercise for me. And I was like, well, every country song has to talk about the American dream. So I decided that I would put that in there. It wasn't the hook. At first, the song was called 1976 because it was all about the bicentennial and my memories as a kid about the bicentennial. And then I realized, no, it's actually about what our idea of the American dream is versus what's actually going on in the country. And it talks about Nixon and Carter and Ford because that was going on when I was in second grade.
Right.
And I really didn't think I was going to put it on the record. And then as I kind of kept writing it, I realized it was the title track to the record because it really did kind of talk to an overarching theme to the rest of the record. Well, we were going to put this record out in August, but everything got backed up and we decided to put it out in October. And that's when we realized we'd be putting it out during election season.
Right.
And it just, I just got back from a tour in the UK and everybody was like, "What's the American dream? What's going on over there?" So it's been a really nice talking point. It's not a political song, but it's a nostalgic song. And I think it speaks to kind of where we all are. Like, what is the dream of the United States of America?
Yeah. Well, I should point out, hate to do this, but I should point out I was only 2 in 1976. I don't have a lot of memories from 1976. So,
I was only
you're a little bit
7.
older than me, but it's fine.
I'm a little older, yeah.
All right. Well, on that point, though, what was your American dream in 1976, if you can remember? And like, what do you think it's today for you in
Well,
2024?
in 1976 was my first awakening of a thing called a country.
Right.
I had no idea. I was 7, but then there was the bicentennial and we were learning about that, and there was the parade and all that. And then there was also the election between Carter and Ford. And I didn't know about that, but they had a mock election in my second grade. And I chose Carter because I thought he was a peanut farmer and pretty cool. And I went home and told my parents, and my father was always a staunch Republican, and he was really upset with me about voting for Carter. And ever since then, I've been a Democrat, And I would just say, like, my American dream, I mean, I'm very in love with how this country was founded and the principles upon which, except for slavery, this country was founded. I mean, we have to talk about it as like sort of through a white European lens, because it's a very different dream for different people. And I'm really glad we're starting to talk about that in the school systems. But for me, growing up, it was definitely this, like, I've done a lot of studying of, American history and the Constitution. I have a little copy of the Constitution and the idea of freedom of speech, freedom of press, a democratic voting system where it's one vote per person is such a beautiful thing, but it's a dream because we have the Electoral College. So it really isn't a democratic voting system anymore. So I'm very, interested in the divide between how this country was founded and how it is now. And I mean, I'm able to do what I love for a living. I bought a house, I have a car, I have a family. I'm one of the lucky ones that could choose this sort of alternative path and not have to go into a job that I didn't like. I can do this, and although I don't make a big living, I make, enough.
Right.
I'm part of the middle class, the working middle class, but I get to do it through art. So I feel like my dream, it's not necessarily American, but my dream was to do that. And I guess it is American because my music is really rooted in American roots music and folk. So
That's a great answer. Have you bothered to ask your son Huck what his American dream is yet?
he doesn't have any concept of that. I do know that when we went to vote, I explained to him what an election was, and he knew it was. And the next morning, he woke up and said, "Mommy, did the girl or the boy win?" And we had a little conversation.
Yeah.
He does know that we live in Tennessee and that we live in the United States of America,
Yeah.
and that Mommy was over in the United Kingdom. And the difference is we have a president and they have kings and queens. That's what he knows.
Okay. Well, good. Well, like you mentioned, there's some other songs on the new album that, again, whether it's just surface or surface and depth level, is sort of this American Pie nostalgia. So, like, there's another song called "The Homecoming Queen," right? That
Yeah.
sort of brings back memories of, for me, especially, growing up in the Midwest and the pomp and circumstance around all that. But the song I have to ask you about is called "I Break Things."
Yeah.
So if there was, I don't know if there's an award for lyric of the year, but if you don't mind, can I just read you some of this and get your reaction around, because obviously you wrote it, get your reaction around just the kind of the context and how you came up with these thoughts. I respect musicians for so many different reasons. One of the ones is just putting their emotions and life experiences out into the public arena for people to react to, right? And you're very personal and open, or you're open about your personal life,
Yeah.
more so than others. But this one is just incredible. So it's called "I Break Things." It's on the new album called "The American Dream." So I'm just going to read. This is a beautiful, beautiful song. So you say here, "I hold the things I love the most and throw them so they shatter on the floor. Then I pick up all the pieces, try to glue them back the way they were before. I've done this all my life, breaking vows and dishes in a rage. Tonight, alone here in this house, I'm lying in a lonely bed that I've made."
Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot there, but
Yeah.
it's concise, it's brief, it rhymes, and it says a lot. What was the specific context of that?
Well, my husband and I divorced 2 years ago. And when I wrote this song was the first week of our separation.
Mhm.
And I was I had moved out and I had moved into a friend of mine's back garage that she converted into a 1-bedroom apartment. And we had a blizzard. And so I was stuck inside this place, and it was all about this place not being mine, and reconciling with, I was devastated, and didn't know what to do. And I was reconciling in some ways with like, what could I have done differently? And that a lot of my part was old patterns. And so that's why I break things. I've done this most of my life, breaking vows and dishes in a rage. Like I've done this, and I'm lying in the lonely bed I made. In some way, it was, at the time I wrote it, it was very personal. It was like, and I'm not usually that directly personal, but I was in such pain. My only way to get through this separation was I wrote half this record through that, to get myself through it, and to kind of, some of it's a plea, please, like, let's make this work out. And that song was like, was very early. I wasn't even in grief yet. I was just in shock. I just literally sat watching the snow out the window and wrote that song really quickly. And then I played it for a few people who said, yeah, that's something really important to say. There's like 2 or 3 writers that I'll bounce it up against and ask, is this too autobiographical? Because I don't want to be like a totally... I guess I am. I would say like I do come from the confessional lyric writing, Joni Mitchell era kind of writing, but I also want to have, like, I also feel like my life isn't to just solely write about my life, is to be narrow-minded as a writer, and so I'm always trying to expand it a little. But in this record, for at least half the songs, I went directly at the divorce. So all my pain is in that song.
Yeah. No, it's obvious. And again, not that anyone really cares, but I was in a long marriage, 25 years, that ended 3 years ago. And there's a lot of dynamics at play, but I moved from Colorado to Atlanta, didn't know anyone here, just to kind of get that reset. It's wild to me how 2 people can be in love, maybe have children, maybe not, whatever, but then feel so disconnected. It's just crazy how that works, and so, yeah, it's the anger, the frustration, the annoying things, the great things, the grief, all those things is just bundled up, and it's a lot to go through. I appreciate you writing that song.
Also, both of us seem to have what we call COVID divorces. A
Yeah.
lot of people got divorced during COVID,
Yeah.
and we had a small child, like all of the stressors. I was unemployed because I'm not touring, there was just so much stress, and it was like we were seeing the best in each other. And then we both got to the part of like, for better or for worse. We got to for worse,
Right.
and our vows couldn't hold,
Right. So do you believe in love for you,
Totally.
in your, I think you're in your early to mid 50s at this point. Like, do you want to find love
Yes.
again?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
I'm
great.
the glasses half full romantic. Like, I don't, I'm a monogamist. I believe in love. I know that my ex-husband, I know that he was the love of my life. I had been in love before, but this was different. This was
Right.
like, I want a family with you. I want to grow old with you. And the truth is, we have a family together and we will grow old together. So that hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Um, After a period of me, like, it's only been 2 years. And so I've been very calculated at not jumping back in. And I've been really enjoying being alone because I'm being more creative and I'm finding out more about me, and I've got good boundaries. But yeah, I definitely want to fall in love again. I just don't know where you fall in love in your mid 50s. Like, I don't go to bars, and I can't imagine online dating, so it's just sort of like, and I don't want another musician. So
Well, and plus you have a relatively young child too, so that there's a lot going on. I was going to ask you about that. I mean, the musician's life, I'm sure it's tough, especially if you have to travel and playing late nights and things like that, and then throwing in a young kid. I mean, I want to get to to Huck and the pregnancy a few years ago, and your age at the time, because it's wild to me, and I can't imagine what you were going through when you found out you were pregnant. I just got a puppy at 50. And I was strung out after a week. I was like, "What am I doing?"
Yep.
Then I, kind of read some of your blogs and stuff, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, she actually had a kid at my age now." I couldn't imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we'll get to that. But
Okay.
all right, so yeah, in terms of the dating thing, especially in Nashville, being a musician, having a young child, I just thoughts and prayers, but it's I'm sure it's out there for you, right?
Maybe. We'll see. If not, I've got my kid and I'm very, very happy with my life.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's great. Well, you're making great music, which is something not everyone can say these days. All right, cool. So I guess if we can go back to the previous album, that was Tucson, right? And if you just said you wrote some of the songs or most of the songs on the American Dream during COVID, but most of the songs, if not all of them, from Tucson were inspired by your time you're getting treated, right, in rehab. I guess
Hmm.
can you compare and contrast the process for each of the last two albums and how your personal life influenced those processes?
Yeah, I would say The American Dream is the same process as my other records. There used to be Horses, Me and the Ghost of Charlemagne. Those are
Okay.
sort of like, that's like my model for how I make records. Tucson, during COVID, as so many people went through, a lot of a lot of my past stuff, trauma,
Hmm.
showed up. My father had just died.
Hmm.
I lost my voice for 2 months. My son was just turning 2. I was an overwhelmed mother with postpartum depression. And I wasn't in, I'll just say this kindly, I was not in a situation that offered the kind of understanding and compassion and support that I needed.
Hmm.
And I had a complete breakdown. I like to call it my midlife, women's neurosis crisis.
Right.
But basically, I was having my trauma was coming back up to light because I had memories that I didn't know. And
Hmm.
I went away to a residential treatment center for trauma, depression, and anxiety. And I went for 1 month, but they told me to stay for 2. So I stayed for 2. And while I was there, I was terrified.
Hmm.
I was away from my young son. I was afraid I wouldn't have a marriage when I got back, all that stuff. And I was going to be confronting some stuff from a long time ago that I
Hmm.
just had always been like, I'm fine. I don't need to look at this again.
Yeah.
And realized I had never really looked at it. So I was there and I was scared. And there was this little room that I would go into to just, I didn't want to make friends. I just wanted to get out of there. And there was a room that had a piano and an old guitar.
Hmm.
And I would sit down there for hours and I just started writing. I wrote a couple of those songs really quickly
Hmm.
as a healing process. And there was one song called Little Red in my group therapy. They had us do these things like our fear inventory, our anger inventory, that. And so for my anger inventory, I just decided to write a song. So I wrote Little Red,
Hmm.
which is a kind of a way of looking at Little Red Riding Hood and a relationship to the wolf who is her demons coming back out. I wrote it just for therapy.
Hmm.
None of these were supposed to see the light of day. They were so personal and
Hmm.
so much about trauma and depression. But Nielsen Hubbard, my producer, is one of my best friends. And when I got back, I called him and I said, I have this body of work, like 6 to 7 songs. I just want to play them for you because I might want to record them just for me. And we just got the people in the room and we all just played at once.
Hmm.
It was like everything is the first or second take of us all being in the same room.
Wow.
And we listened to it afterwards and he said, this is so raw this is something this world needs, especially during the pandemic. So we put strings on it, and my manager heard it and said, you have to put this out. And I was like so scared, because it was so, but then I got a lot of people who responded to it saying, thanks for giving voice to what, I feel. And so I kind of got through the shame of, mental health issues by just saying, this is what I've been going through. And I think of this as like my little record that I didn't know I'd ever put out.
That's amazing. So in the spirit of, because you never know who's going to listen to this or watch this, and you never know what state of mental health people are in, I guess, do you remember the moment or the situation that you sort of said, okay, I need to go, and deal with this, is there,
Oh,
what did that look like?
I'll be completely candid about this because people understand this. We had because of what had happened to me in my childhood, I had a lot of pent up rage that I didn't know about, that was that simmered. And during postpartum, it started coming out. And I was talking to my GYN about it, and she said, this is postpartum. So she put me on an antidepressant. And then it started coming out on my husband. And we're very different people. He did not grow up in a house of conflict. I grew up in a house of conflict, and there was a lot of high emotions and fighting. He didn't have any of that. So he would just walk away, which for me is the worst thing that can happen because I have an abandonment fear. And for him, it was the worst thing to happen because his fear was of not having safety. And so we were at cross purposes. And one night it got so bad that I ended up on the floor of my room with a bottle of pills and a picture of my son in one hand, just begging God. And I would say I knew I wasn't going to take the pills. I've never been suicidal. But it got to the point of like, I give up, and I called my therapist. It was like 11 o'clock at night. And she was like, I'm making calls for you. 3 days later, I was at the treatment center. And so it had gotten to that point. And I know I'm very open that I'm in recovery.
Right.
And I'm a recovered alcoholic, and I used alcohol to cover that rage. And I got sober 11 years ago, but I had never like confronted some of the reasons why I drank so much. And so I look back, and it's like it totally wrecked my marriage, but I had to go through that because now I can finally say I have walked through that, and it doesn't dictate my life anymore. And I'm happy. And my depression, it's never going to go away because I do have low grade depression, but I have a doctor and I have medication. And that's what that record is about. I think there's a lot of gospel in that record too, a lot of sort of gratefulness. And so as tough as that time was, and I really felt alone in it. I've never been able to talk to my family about it. I never felt supported by my family. Growing up, I was always considered sort of a melancholic, artistic temperament, temper tantrum little girl, but nobody ever asked me why I was sad. Nobody asked me, why are you so angry? And that's part of my journey is I was dealing with a lot of stuff that a little girl shouldn't deal with on my own because nobody believed me.
Oh man. Yeah.
But a lot of, the thing is that I thought I was alone. And I've talked to a lot of my friends, a lot of artists deal with depression. And I write my way through it. And so I had to write that record to heal myself. And then I gave it to the world, hoping that, like as an act of trust. And I'm really glad. I kind of went to #1 in folk radio, which shocked me of all my records. So,
well, I'm sure it's helped more people than you know, right?
maybe.
I guess one question, because it doesn't come across overt in the music. I don't think, because a lot of people in your genre, which I'll generally categorize as Americana, a lot of people grew up in the Midwest and the South where there was a faith upbringing. And I think sometimes I look at that and it's a little bit of a mirage and a little bit of a crutch. I think that people kind of lean on when they're struggling, but I do believe when I talk to people similar to you that, they've dealt with alcoholism or other addictions, sometimes not all, but sometimes they'll point to like their faith as, getting them through that. I guess, do you have a similar experience? And if not, I'm just curious, if or if not, and if it's not, I guess what got you through that? Was it the hope of having the young child, at the time and seeing his life through and all that?
I grew up Catholic and hated it. Tried to get involved, tried to kind of go into it, but I was not allowed to be an altar girl because there were no altar girls back then in the 80s. I
Right.
argued with the priest about why there were no women priests. He was like, just because. And I was like, you mean feudal rights from the 1300s? Because he was like, you don't talk back to me. And I just walked. I walked
Mm.
away. And then I would have called myself a lazy atheist, which meant an
Okay.
agnostic. I didn't need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when I got sober, I got sober in a program that meets in church basements and people smoke outside and it's got crap coffee. And there's a whole part of it where you have to give your life over in a surrender
Hmm.
to what they call as a power greater than yourselves that you define for yourself.
Hmm.
I always thought AA was a cult, a religious cult. And don't tell me I need God. I don't want God. I fired God.
Sure.
And God wasn't there for me. That's what I always thought is like, all this stuff has happened to me over the years. And where was God? God doesn't exist. But I was able to kind of define my own version of that, which to me, I just call spirit or
Mhm.
sometimes creativity. Whatever made my son is God. I use it in quotes, or goddess or whatever. And I have a strong meditation practice that I've had for years, for like 15 years.
Okay.
And a strong, what I call meditation journaling practice. And I pray. I don't know what the hell I'm praying to. And I don't expect the prayer to be answered. But I do notice, I believe there's no such thing as coincidence and serendipity.
Hmm.
I think that's answered prayers. And I believe that I have a benevolent spirit around me that sort of helps me when I'm someplace.
Got it.
Doesn't guide things, doesn't tell me where to go, doesn't change the universe, but uses whatever's there. So I have a really strong faith. And while I was there were a lot of patients there that were there to get sober,
Hmm.
and a lot of people there fighting it. And I felt lucky. I was 7 years sober when I went.
Hmm.
And all these people were going to the meetings that we would have, and they would fight it. And I'm like, you guys, you killed somebody, drunk driving. You want to know how to get sober? I've been doing this for 7 years. This is proof that you can do this.
Right.
So I don't proselytize, but I saw these people without
Hmm.
faith
Hmm.
fail. Like most of them would go through the 60 days, be sober, walk out, go to the airport and drink. Every single one that I knew from that program went back out and drank again.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
And the only way that I am sober 11 years later and I don't have any interest in taking a drink is that I have put my faith in something that all I know is that I don't know if there's a God. I just know it's not me. And my decisions back then got me into a heap of trouble. So I do have a strong faith. I also creatively believe this, and I teach this when I teach writing, is that the first process of writing or doing anything creatively is like channeling.
Hmm.
You just like dump it out and you don't know where it's coming from and you don't edit it and you don't question it. You just write it out. Then you walk away and you come back with smart brain and you make decisions about it and you edit it. So if I can be still and quiet enough to listen to the wind, I can hear the words show up.
Hmm.
So it sounds real woo-woo. I'm totally not religious. My ex is also a recovering alcoholic.
Hmm.
And so we share a real spiritual belief, and we're raising Huck with a notion of God and openness, and he's doing yoga with me and things like that. So very, very, faith is very important to me.
No, that's great. Yeah, thank you. And I guess I want to move on to the motherhood aspect of things, but you said that you felt really alone, and during the time in Tucson, and it that whole episode, I think you said it destroyed the marriage. So that's the unfortunate part. I think just hearing you, reading about you, I think the fortunate thing for you, back to is there love in your future? I think the great news is you're going to be a much more whole person for whoever you meet, right? And
Oh yeah.
your foundation will be so much stronger than it was, prior to that, which is
Oh,
awesome.
I'm a different person. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, all right. So where were you when you found out you were pregnant? At age, I don't know, were you pregnant at 49 and had Huck at 50? Is that right?
Had Huck at 50. Yeah. I, well, what happens when I did IVF, we used an egg donor because I was too old. And basically you have they insert it's a blastocyte. It's like a grouping of cells into your body, and they wait 10 days. And then you go and get a blood test from your GYN, and then she calls you the next day. So it's just 10 days until I had to find out. And I remember now the first try that we didn't work.
Hmm.
And so I got the call that I wasn't pregnant, and I went downhill with that. I was just like, this is not going to work. I was never supposed to be a mother. And Jamie was like, let's go for a walk. And he was like, we're going to try one more time. We're just going to try one more time. And I was like, I'm not sure if I can take it. He said, let's just try one more time. So we tried the second time, and I literally was like the whole time super negative. Like, this is not going to work. Whatever. I'm going to like protect myself from disappointment. The first time I like brought in all my little icons, and I prayed and I meditated and I did the whole thing. The second time I was like, screw that. This ain't going to work. I'm just ready for it. And so when they called me, I was in my office, and I remember dropping to my knees and then walking outside and telling Jamie, and he just started crying.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was an incredible day because I was shocked. I didn't think at my age it would work. When I talked to my gynecologist about going through this, she said it's the age of the egg, not the egg. We got together when I was 46, and we tried. And then we got, then basically they did a thing with me to like overproduce my eggs, and we tried and it wasn't working. And so they told me that my eggs weren't viable. So we went through IVF and an egg donor, and she was in her early 20s. We don't know anything about her except
Right.
her number. But she was in her early 20s and already had 4 kids. So she was really fertile. We used her egg
Awesome.
and Jamie. And so I still think there are risks. Like a woman at 49 might not be able to hold the
Right.
embryo in place, but I got lucky.
No, that's great. Well, like
Yeah.
you said, there's no coincidences, right? And there's something else at play there. Well, so since Huck was born, obviously you went through some struggles, some old trauma emerged. You've kind of dealt with that, not kind of. You've dealt with that, and but it was sort of a unexpected turn of events for your life, and I think so. You've started a blog called Menopausal Mommy, right?
Yep.
So people can find you at menopausalmommy.blog, I think, and
Right.
you post to that pretty regularly. I'm not going to read all of this, but earlier this year you posted something that was pretty powerful. I'm going to read a snippet, but I think for me it's you use the words I never expected and I never thought, and to me, if you kind of take all the other details around, which again I'm not going to read everything, but there's some details in there that I think are really really fascinating. Just for anyone watching this or listening to this, I never expected, I never thought. I mean, that it's a great lesson because no matter how, traumatic, dramatic, surprising things happen. We don't expect a lot of things in life. And the fact that you were able to just sort of take all of these, I'll call them, body blows or, throwing stars at you, and are able to kind of withstand and be here, right, and make albums and perform. I think you're playing the Bluebird next week, right? So all these things,
Yep.
I think it's a really great lesson for everybody. And I just think, in reading this, it's like I never expected, and I never thought. I think those words are used, dozens and dozens of times. But anyway, it's a great lesson. I guess, would you mind if I read a few of it?
No, go ahead. I'd love that.
All right, so this is on menopausalmommy.blog from Amy Speace, and it's a post, I think, from February. And again, I'll try not to read it all. I might have to. I don't know. But you say here, but here I am about to turn 55. My mom turns 80 at the end of this month, and my son turns 5 in March. How did my life end up here? It was a long circular route, that's for sure. I started writing this blog a few years ago, nursing in a nursing chair in Huck's room while he wiggled it inside of me. So here it goes. I never expected everything that happened after. I never expected to be so in love being a mom that I was kicking my younger self for not starting earlier, as if I could have. I'd have a big family. I never expected to be as happy as I was. I never expected to miss the sleepless nights as my son toddled into toddlerhood. I never expected to be so sad when the Carter PJ onesies that we had bought him at every single size change was discontinued, and the last one he had was the 1-year-old ones. I never expected to be so in love with having a family. On the other hand, I never expected to get postpartum as Huck was weaning and have to go on antidepressants and mood stabilizers. I never expected my father to die of pancreatic cancer in 4 months when Huck was just over a year. I never expected to have my own trauma breakdown, which made me rage so much that I lost my marriage. I never expected to go away to treat the trauma and depression and discover where it all came from. I never expected to leave our house that night and never spend another night there. I never expected to be separated when Huck was 2 and divorced by the time he was 4. I never thought I'd ever get up off the floor and be happy again. I never thought I'd lose the things that made me the happiest. I never thought I'd live alone again. I never thought I'd be okay living alone again. I never thought I'd own my own house. I never thought I'd get up off the ground and try to learn to walk again. I never thought any of these things. And then you go on to say, the most I didn't expect is that I never expected to be a mother ever. And if Huck is the gift of all of this, I'd do it over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. All true.
Yeah. That's, if you take 10% of that for someone, that's a lot for someone to do 10% of that. But your father dying right after your son was born, all the things we've talked about. I guess, why do you feel, maybe you don't feel comfortable, but why do you feel like your voice is important, and to share those words, to write the songs that we talked about earlier, like, for example, I Break Things. Is that part of your process to kind of deal and reflect? And are you hoping to help other people?
I think that's part of what makes me as a writer. My whole life I've been a writer. I was a writer before I was a singer, before I was a musician. And I've always tried to reflect the world as I see it. I don't write fiction. Menopausal Mommy turned into a full memoir, which I'm trying to find a publisher for.
Awesome.
I don't write for therapy. I go to therapy for therapy. I write to make sense of things. I think I didn't know what I was doing at first. I just was doing it. And over the years of having done it and having had the feedback I've gotten, I recognize from other people's experience with my music and from the music that I choose to listen to, that it is in hearing somebody else tell our story that we feel like we belong, and belonging is what heals us. So most people who've gone through any kind of challenge, doesn't have to be a trauma, but anything, they feel very isolated. We've all gone through it. Everybody's gone through something. And when you go through something that shakes the foundations of what you thought was supposed to be, you spend a little bit of time feeling like I'm the only person in the world feeling this. Until somebody says me too. And when somebody says me too, you feel community around grief. And that's the only way grief gets healed. And so after a long time of being this kind of writer and putting out these records and having people come to me and saying that song, me too on that song, me too on that song. Right. I realized that the fear of giving away too much got in the way of me being an honest artist. Not that every song I write is that. Like, I have character songs and things like that. But I don't mind. I'm pretty vulnerable as a human being. I think it has a lot to do with owning my mess. Before I owned my mess, I was just fronting. I mean, I had a successful life, and a lot of people were like, I want what you have. But I hated myself. I was just waiting for someone to figure out that I was a fraud. I really wasn't happy for a long time. Miserable. It looked shiny on the outside, and I could pretend, but underneath it, I was a train wreck. It's why I drank so much, you know? And then I got to wrestle with all that and then put it to the light. And now I can say, I like myself. Flaws and all, I have one life to live.
Right.
And if my life path is to be as vulnerable as possible so somebody else can hear it and say me too, then I've done my path. I'm not meant to be famous. I'm not meant, like I said, I'm a working class musician.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm not ashamed of all the stuff because I really believe that, like you said, we go through this, and I don't want to look back and say, I wish I hadn't had this. I wish I hadn't, because I wouldn't have Huck. Like right now.
No, totally.
The greatest gift I've got is Huck.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing. That's really good. So, all right. So that's a really deep conversation there. I guess, back a little bit back to the music. So just ironically, did you ever watch the Ken Burns documentary about country music?
I watched most of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so I've watched it, I don't know, 6-7 times. I'm obsessed with it. I mean, it's long, but every time I watch it, I pick up something interesting. Literally, I've watched I think it was one of the last 2 episodes. They spend 10 minutes talking about John Vesner.
Oh, John and Kathy are my good friends.
Yeah. So when I watched that, and then, just doing research, I mean, it sounds like he's been a mentor of yours for a number of years and all that. I guess what's that been like? Because he's a legend, and I know you work with a lot of amazing people, but I mean, he's not everybody may know his name. Like, it's not as popular maybe as Kathy Mattea, but he's legendary. I guess what has that meant to you for your career and your music?
It's meant everything. The two of them are family to me. I met John years and years ago at a songwriters, like a weekend classes, and he heard a couple of my songs, and he pulled me aside and said, I hear something in you. Like, what are you doing next weekend? Do you want to come to Nashville and do some writing with me? And I was like, I don't know what I had to do the next weekend, but I got myself on a plane and got to Nashville. And that became more of a regular thing. So he was really like mentoring me, and we were writing songs together. And then he and Kathy, then I met Kathy. I was super intimidated.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Kathy Mattea. But she kind of took me under her wing, and when I got here, she drove me around the neighborhoods, and we decided what neighborhood I was going to live in. And then over the years, the two of them are the people I call Kathy and ask her. I mean, we talk about everything, life, and she and John helped me get through this divorce, really helped me. But also I'll talk to Kathy about aging into this industry, or if my voice isn't working, what am I doing wrong? We talk about stuff like that. John and he's one of the only people that I will play new songs for. And we still co-write. John writing with people like John. And I wrote with Gary Nicholson for this last record, and he's a legend. And those kind of people that have weirdly, and I'm not sure how this has happened, but they've called me, like, I always feel like I'm the kid at the adult table, and they're like, no, you're like an equal to us. We think you're a great writer. For them to do that and to invite me into their world has been a PhD in songwriting. My writing before I met them to what it is now, they taught me everything.
That's incredible. Thanks for sharing that. I guess where do you think you are as an artist today, and where do you want to be?
I'm exactly where I should be. I don't know where that is.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the middle. Like I'm making music that I like, that's coming from my heart. It lands where it lands. It's out of my hands. Where where I should be. People are always like, why aren't you more famous? Or you should be here, you should be there. I'm just happy to make a living at this. And that there's, I go to England for the first time in 4 years and people showed up, and people still know my music and want to buy my stuff. Like that's what I want. Where do I want to be? I'd love to get that book published.
Yeah.
I think it's really, I really believe in that book.
Yeah.
I just finished an MFA degree in creative writing and poetry.
Yeah.
I have a book of poetry that came out of that program that I'd love to get published. I'm trying to continue writing. I love teaching. I have a part-time job teaching English at a university around here.
Awesome.
And because I can only tour every other weekend because of having Huck. So
Sure.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And so I get to teach these kids like how to try to get them to enjoy reading and writing when they don't really want to. So that's been really fulfilling for me. I think the only thing I would like to do is maybe be better at exercising and eat better. I'm a terrible cook. So
all right. Well, so the spirit of this podcast, in closing, is it's a lot of things, but curiosity is sort of the main theme. I can't sing, I can't play an instrument, but I've loved music ever since I can remember, and I've always been fascinated by, the lyrics, the stories, the context behind the stories, the journeys, all those things. I guess at this point, given all the things that you're working on and have worked on, that you've gone through personally, having a young child at this point in your life, what are you most curious about?
That's a really good question. Well, I'm curious. I'd like to say I'm not scared, that I'm curious about what we're walking into with this next presidency. I'm a folk singer, so it's got to be clear that I did not vote for who won the election.
Sure.
And there's a lot of fear around that. And because I'm a meditator, I'm trying to really sort of stay center about that and not let my life be dictated by fear. I'm very curious. Rather than like terrified, right. I'm curious how this is going to affect all of our worlds. And a lot of my friends write. I live in Tennessee, which is a really like Bible Belt place where they're banning books and they're outlawing drag shows and things like that. And to me, that's really abhorrent. I'm lucky to live in Nashville, which is Democratic. So I'm curious about the state of the world. Because like another one of my jams is I'm just like a political junkie. But I'm also curious about what my next project is. Like, I don't know. Like, that's kind of how I am when I'm finished a project.
Right.
I'm like sitting here like, am I going to write a part of my idea? I have an idea of writing a one-woman show about an artist coming up in the mid-90s in Greenwich Village. And some of the songs that I have, like, especially the piano ones, seem to lend themselves to musicals. So that's a possibility. Possibility is another record. A possibility is a left turn kind of record. A possibility is another memoir. I don't know. So I'm curious what I can do, and I'm mostly curious about Huck. He is like, I mean, he knows the word phosphorescent, I'm scary. I don't want him to grow up. I just love every age. So I don't want to say I'm curious about what he's like, because that means he's going to grow up too fast. So I'm, um, I am curious about who he's going to be.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
as you should. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. And, for you to take this much time and go into all those things that we talked about, it's just, it's an honor. And congrats on the new album. It's a pleasure to meet you. And I hope to see you on the road or back in Nashville at some point. But thanks, Amy, so much.
Thanks for having me. This was a pleasure to talk to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay.